Welcome to the build guide for getting Righteous Fire started on no gear whatsoever, off of a league start, and getting switched into that Righteous Fire by level 33 in your first Ascendancy. Let's get into it. As you can see here, we have a Righteous Fire character that's level 33. I'm just going to showcase this. I basically just was practicing my running from getting from level 0 all the way to 30. I leveled with an attack, two-handed skill perforate, and then once I got to the first lab, I finished the first lab, then I'm able to make my switch, and this is the transition of what the character looks like right after I got out of the lab and I got my first Ascendancy, Tassilio. Tassilio gives us 2% life regen, 100 fire res, and it gives us life recovery rate, and it gives us hits taken as fire damage, for fizz damage that is. So there's some key factors here. First off, 100 fire res. This gets you all the way to cap fire res instantly right off the bat, which means you're not going to be taking a junk load of extra fire damage from your Righteous Fire degen. You're still going to be taking a lot, but you're going to be capped right away from the first Ascendancy. With this Ascendancy alone, all you really need is about another 35 fire res to cap your res completely for after getting the minus 30 res from doing Act 5 and getting the extra minus 30 res again from doing Act 10. So you'll need one piece of gear with fire res and you'll be capped for 75 fire res for Righteous Fire for the rest of your playtime at that point. Other than that, you'll just get cold and lightning res, and you'll fix your other elemental resistances that way. On top of that, the sustain is important to out-regen the degen we get from Righteous Fire, from the 2% life regen there. And then on top of that, one of the biggest parts, and frankly the biggest part of this whole Ascendancy, is the 50% life recovery rate. What this means is when we take fire damage from enemies attacking us, we then get a multiplier of 50% onto our life regen. What that means is our Enduring Cry, our life regen, gets multiplied by 1.5. So instead of regenerating 800 life per second over 1 second from popping Enduring Cry, this would actually regenerate 1200 life. Our entire life pool would be regenerated if we have this life recovery rate procced, which if you're in fighting enemies, you will have it procced. Most enemies hit with physical damage in the game, so getting hit while having this Ascendancy point means you're pretty much fairly consistently going to have 50% life recovery rate just from this Ascendancy. Now obviously we're going to need more regeneration than just 2% from our Ascendancy. We're going to need it on the tree and we're going to need it other places, mainly speaking Enduring Cry. Enduring Cry carries the regen to defeat the degen from Righteous Fire, and we support it with cooldown recovery speed on the tree like this to make it so it can pop off more often. On top of that, this other node here, Escalation, which I love, every time it pops off, we instantly get 10%, just popped right onto our life pool instantly, which is another additional, basically, sustain mechanic. Now, on top of stacking Enduring Cry cooldown recovery speed, we also use Call to Arms. Call to Arms is where you basically get to auto set your Enduring Cry to occur. You put it on your left click over here, which means every time you're moving around, it'll constantly be going off whenever it gets done with the cooldown. So this is very useful while playing to not have to think about pressing Enduring Cry. It just will always be popping off for you, always helping sustain your Righteous Fire. And then on top of that, just around the tree, we're grabbing life regen pretty much everywhere we come across it. We're obviously going for combat and stamina, and initially we're going to go for this regen over here. Now, what does it look like with Righteous Fire? To begin with, Righteous Fire, it'll look like this. Righteous Fire goes up. This is what it's going to happen. It's going to degen, and the second we hit that Enduring Cry, it'll go right back up to full. We can also negate the amount we're degenning simply by popping a life flask when it starts to degen there, and it won't go quite down as far. So if you're a little bit afraid of getting one shot with the lower life pool, you can pop some life flasks in that specific scenario to make it not degen so far. Now, Enduring Cry in the upcoming patch is getting a nerf. It's going from a cooldown of 6 seconds to 8 seconds. What this means is it's going to go off less often for us. So if we have Enduring Cry here, stock it in our gear, it says 3.3 seconds of a cooldown, which is not too bad, but with the 2 additional seconds to that cooldown, it's going to be a longer time before we get the Enduring Cry proc, so we're going to degen farther on our health pool. To simulate this, we can use Urgent Orders. Luckily for us, Urgent Orders adds exactly 2 seconds to the cooldown, which is exactly the nerf happening to Enduring Cry. So we can simulate the new Enduring Cry in this patch before it even is announced. So it's fantastic. In-game use, what does it look like as level 33 using Righteous Fire? This is what it looks like. We go closer to 50% HP rather than going from rather than going from like no HP or going from full HP to 70%, we go from full HP to 50%. This is obviously a little bit more dangerous. It's a little bit more spicy, but you can negate this somewhat with life flasks, where you press the life flask right when it starts degenning, and you'll only go to about 70% like you did before. It takes a lot more thought with life flasks, but frankly, you only really need them for when you're fighting a boss or playing it a little bit extra safe here and there. And then on top of that, when you're fighting monsters in maps, you'll have the additional 50% life recovery rate from the Chieftain Ascendancy, which will make it not even go close to this amount of degen. You'll be a lot safer. On top of this, this is where we are at our worst in sustain. This is when the sustain is at its peak for badness. It's going to only get better as we level, because we'll get more percent life regen on the tree, and we'll get a higher life pool. Now we're on a character that is level 70 instead of 33. We've had some levels, we've got more passives. This is what the sustain looks like now. It degens to about 80%, and then it still goes up. And this is with urgent orders in there, and I think it's with second wind. Yeah, it's with second wind as well. Real quick here, I'm going to give you a little showcase of what Righteous Fire looks going through a level 33 zone, a level 33 character, and just give you a feel for what it's going to be like when you're leveling this character. Right now I just have dash and shield charge to get going around, and this is pretty much it. You just kind of just run through the mobs, they melt while you stay there. Eventually you'll get to the point where we get Elemental Equilibrium. I already have Orb of Storms for it, even though I can't use it yet because I don't have that passive, and that will give a massive damage boost to our character. We also would pop like Wave of Conviction to inflict exposure early on. Eventually we'll swap that to a Scorching Ray instead. For now it's just Wave of Conviction because it's an easy one cast and it hits everything. And so when you get to a mob where you want to do damage, when you get to the part where you have E, stuff like that, you'll just go up to them, you'll drop your Orb of Storms, you'll drop your Wave of Conviction, you'll just run in circles and they'll die. And it's only going to get better from here. We're missing some of the most important damage upgrades like Elemental Equilibrium, like Elemental Overload. Those things alone more than double the damage we would have. We're only using a 3-link, stuff like that. The damage is going to escalate a lot better, and it's going to be smooth, and it's going to get us to the point where we can kill bosses when we actually min-max the build. Now let's talk passive tree for this build. This build is going to be specifically designed for hardcore, meaning I'm going to be picking up way more life, way more defensives than I normally would in softcore, solely for the purpose of I don't want to die. I don't want to get set back to standard. I want to play this character and not die very much. Normally in softcore, I die a couple times. I don't care, whatever. In this league, I want to be making my character so I can survive bad mechanics like desyncs, like disconnects, like getting hit by mechanics that I suck at dodging, stuff like that. So if you're playing softcore with this build, I will have some alternate tree suggestions for if you want to spec for more damage instead of the crazy amount of life I'm going to be going for hardcore. Now, you can still copy it on softcore if you really want to be tanky and have some good chances at being able to learn new mechanics and fight through them and tank them and start learning to dodge new things. Real quick before I go over the passive tree, let's talk gem links. When you're doing this build, you're going to want something like Second Wind linked to your Enduring Cry, as well as something like Blood Magic. If you're ever noticing you're getting to the point where you're spending your mana and you're not able to cast anything, the one thing you cannot afford to have blocked by that is your Enduring Cry. So if you have Blood Magic on it, you won't be killed by not having mana. More or less, you'll always have life in order to cast your Enduring Cry to keep your sustain up. That's one thing I'd recommend, is Blood Magic on your Enduring Cry as well as Second Wind. This makes your Enduring Cry happen a lot more often. You'll see if I take Second Wind out, it goes to a 3.3 versus a 2.9. So that shaves a whole 10% off the cooldown time, which is huge for more sustain. Now let's talk damage links for Righteous Fire. Righteous Fire, the best damage links are always Elemental Focus. It's always burning damage. These are always your first two links. They're fantastic. After that, I would recommend something like Inspiration, then Efficacy, and lastly, Conk Effect. Conk Effect's one of those ones that's way better damage than Efficacy or Inspiration, but it shrinks your AoE. For clearing and mapping, you don't really want this in. It definitely messes up your clear speed pretty significantly, and it's one of those gems where you'll have increased AoE socketed in, maybe that'll be your fourth link, and then you'll swap in Conk Effect, or you'll have Efficacy as your fourth link, and you'll swap in Conk Effect when you want to do more single target. Now, I glossed over that, but the weird thing with supporting Righteous Fire with Inspiration is, you'll have Inspiration, you'll cast Righteous Fire, and it's not going to generate you any inspiration charges. What this means is you need to generate your inspiration charges elsewhere. Now I have a few suggestions for doing this. One of them is linking inspiration to your Scorching Ray, so when you go to basically inflict exposure, you'll also generate these inspiration charges. Them being generated by another skill allows your Righteous Fire to benefit from the more elemental damage per inspiration charge. That being said, now that we're talking about Scorching Ray, this is a perfect segue into using Infused Channeling. Infused Channeling grants infusion, which makes it so skills with the same damage types get a bonus. More or less, it means if we're using Scorching Ray and we get Infused Channeling, which means we have to channel for about 1 second, you'll see it's this buff over here. It says you deal more damage of the types matching your channeled skills gem tags. So since Scorching Ray is fire and duration, that means my fire duration spell, Righteous Fire, will deal 10% more damage just because of infusion. So it's a nice little support to having your Scorching Ray. Just channel it up every now and then, get it going. It'll last for 6 seconds. You can run around and you can restart it by channeling it another 1 second, roughly speaking. And it's just a nice little extra boost in damage. After those things, we also want to look into doing an Orb of Storms. This is what we always use to throw down on a boss to make it constantly get hit by lightning damage. And this procs EE, which makes us do a ton more fire damage. Because EE means when we hit them with lightning damage, their fire resistance is lowered by 50%, which is huge for Righteous Fire damage. I'd also recommend possibly mixing in an Orb of Storms as well, so we can have more things hitting them with lightning damage. That way, if you shield charge and you hit them with fire damage because you have fire damage rolled on your scepter like I do like this, then it gets reset to the right EE as soon as possible. And also, it guarantees a higher uptime on Elemental Overload, because you're constantly hitting with Stormbrand and Orb of Storms. There's a good chance you're going to crit recently and proc your Elemental Overload, which is 40% more damage there. After EE uptime, we're looking at our movement skills. Our movement skills, I'd recommend something like Flame Dash and Shield Charge. I generally like to Shield Charge around in maps and generate my Fortify. This would be ideal to link with faster attacks, so that way it's not quite so slow. Right now our attack speed's really bad. We haven't got it anywhere on the tree, and all we have is just Fortify to link it with. This will improve when you get more sockets available, more links available, and you can get something like faster attacks in there, and it'll be popping off. You'll just be Shield Charging through melting enemies. Something like Holy Flame Totem, Purifying Flame, or Conch Path could also be really nice to mix into your build, because you can create Consecrated Ground, which gives you an additional 6% life regen per second while you're on it. Something to consider for some more sustain if you just want more sustain in your build. Looking at our auras, we want to start out with Malevolence always, and initially while leveling, you're going to want to use Vitality to start off with because it gives you sustain, and Purity of Fire doesn't. Purity of Fire doesn't give you sustain until it gives you additional max fire res. It gets max fire res with levels. By level 16, it's +2 to max fire res. By the time you get to level 20, it'll be +4 maximum fire res, which means at that point, it gives you a lot more defense against the degen of Righteous Fire, thus more sustain. Whereas Vitality initially gives you a % regen, which means you can use it early on, and then you want to transition over to Purity of Fire to have better sustain once it outclasses Vitality. With the new Vitality, it might be somewhat up in the air whether or not Vitality is more worth it or Purity of Fire is, but my personal preference is going to be late game level 20 Purity of Fire giving me 4 max fire res. It's going to help me against one-shots, which I'd rather have that than a little bit more sustain with the new Vitality, which it might be more sustained, but I'm not 100% sure on that because, frankly, Purity of Fire, 4 max fire res, reducing the amount of damage you take might outweigh the 240 flat life regen you can get from Vitality. After Vitality, and this is a mandatory thing you do not want to skip, is Immortal Call. With the Chieftain Ascendancy, Valico, it says you deal 15% more damage if you've lost an endurance charge in the past 8 seconds. This is procced when you use Immortal Call. On top of that, Immortal Call gives you a ton of fizz reduction and a decent amount of elemental damage reduction. Pretty much what that means, if somebody's about to hit you with, say, a Shaper Slam, you Immortal Call, you're not going to die. Because Immortal Call gives you so much fizz reduction that Shaper Slams, Elder Slams, whatever it is, if you time your Immortal Call right, it's going to protect you from that physical damage. Also, you can use it against elemental damage, and it'll all heavily mitigate that damage as well. So it's very important to help your survivability to proc that when you're about to take a big hit, along with also proccing it just to give yourself the additional 15% more damage. And the good news is, Enduring Cry, by the time it runs out, which is like 2 seconds, it lasts a fairly long time because of your consuming 5 endurance charges. By the time it runs out, you'll be back up to about 5 endurance charges. Especially if you're near an enemy, you'll be generating more endurance charges than just the 1 endurance charge per second from Chieftain. That pretty much wraps up my explanation for starting Righteous Fire while leveling, general gem links you want to go for, general gem supports you want to go for, and now let's get into the passive tree on how to path this out. Now let's look at leveling this character. Initially, you start out grabbing all the life nodes like so. Next, we're going over for two-handed weapons. I chose to level with Perforate after testing one-handed, dual-wielding, and two-handed. Perforate I found was the strongest skill with the little investment we're going to put into it that helped us get through the levels. I'm going to explain why. The reason is Perforate gives a lot of damage when you switch to Blood Stance and you do Perforate on single target, and you can do Sand Stance while leveling. On top of that, we can mix in ward cries like Seismic Cry, like Intimidating Cry, along with Enduring Cry. All that stuff leads to us dealing really heavy damage with Perforate, and it's great single target. So you just grab a two-handed axe, you use the vendor recipe, which is a whetstone, a two-handed axe of the next tier. Whenever you're upgrading your axe, just get like a jade chopper, then the wood splitter, then it's like the pole axe, and then I think after that's like the double-bladed axe or something. There's basically, you're just going to keep finding better and better physical damage axes, and you will use a whetstone, that axe, and then you'll use some random essence on a rustic sash. You'll sell that to a vendor, and they will give you back an axe with 50 to 60% increased fizz on it, which will be the axe you use. Pretty much, I did upgrading axes to about the double Val axe or the double bladed axe, and then at that point I had hit level 30, I had done my normal lab, and that's at the point when I had to stop messing around with this stuff and I could switch out of it. When we're at level 30, our tree ends up looking something like this, I would say, and what you end up doing is you get 4 respec points. You get 2 of those, which you get through going through the quest line, and then you get another 2 through doing the Mud Flats quest or the Gold Hand quest, and I unspec right here, right here, right here. So I get 4 points there, and I put that straight into Arsonist, straight into Called Arms, which we do not grab until we are switching into Righteous Fire and doing Enduring Cry only, and then I start working my way towards combat stamina. So that's the point at which our character is at currently. Now, in the description of this video, I'm going to leave a path of building for the levels after that. Like, to say this is a level 30 tree, we're going to be looking at a level 40 tree, 50 tree, 60 tree, so that way you can have a description. So just click through those alternate trees, so that way you can know this is what I need for my character, this is the levels I need to have them at, this is the passives, the order in which I'm grabbing these. I will also say this is going to be a tree for a hardcore character. I'm grabbing way more life than I need to. For a softcore playstyle, you definitely would probably want to drop life and grab more damage. I'm going to leave that up to you, but essentially what you're going to want to do is drop the least efficient life nodes and grab the most efficient damage nodes. Hopefully this breaks down how to league start with Righteous Fire with no gear, and it gives you some idea of what you can do, how to start it, and hopefully you guys have some fun with it. I apologize if this video was rather confusing or jumbled. I went through so many retakes of the audio and re-describing the same sections. I'm starting to lose my mind what thing I did well and what thing I didn't. And we'll see how well I can cut this all together, and hopefully it makes sense when it actually comes together. I appreciate you guys watching the video, and I'll see you on the Heist League launch playing Righteous Fire, my friends. Best of luck out there.